Welcome to the 4th episode of the Corner Table Podcast, a podcast that is made by world builders of a sort, for world builders. I am one of the hosts. My name is Xavier, and I'm also joined by the other two hosts.
Hi, I'm Kevin.
And I'm Braylon.
You know, you had to get it in there quick. We can't lose the Zoomers' attention.
Got to keep going.
On our podcast about world building, known to be
got a lot to talk about.
Electric. We do actually have a lot to talk about. There's a lot to go over today. I'm excited for later on. We're going to have a nice discussion where we get to contrast things. Maybe at some point we'll finally get to do a power ranking. We'll turn this into like a sports podcast.
Yeah, there you go.
World building somehow.
People love their top 10s.
Episode.
Yeah.
People love top 10s. Come on. Tier list, top 10s, power rankings. Maybe
top
a nice
10
versus, a debate. Come on. There it is.
Didn't we do that 2 episodes ago?
Not a real one.
Not
I'm
a real
saying,
one.
like,
Not- yeah.
no one got up from their seat. No one was yelling.
The table remained with all 4 legs on the ground.
It's true. I mean, come on. So, not that today, but we are going to have a discussion later on that I'm excited for. But we're going to start out with our discussion about how big a world is.
Yeah.
AKA scope. That's probably in the title. But like the scope of a world. There's a lot of ways that you can define how big a world that you're building is.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. What is scope? When we talk about scope, does that mean the physical size of the world that you're building? Does it mean how the amount of things you are doing? What are we getting into with that?
I think it's a bit of both.
Okay.
I think a good way to look at it is how much stuff is in your world related to the size of it.
Okay.
And then how involved is that stuff? How much lore, if you will, is attached to it instead of just there's 1 million people in this one city and we talked to 3 of them.
Yes.
That's a very broad scope, but a very thin, shallow scope. Yeah.
I would define it more mathematically as essentially what is the breadth of my world? Like how wide do I want to throw the net? Multiplied by how deep is my world.
Sure.
Like how much do I actually want to flesh out my 200 planets that I've thought of?
Yeah. And so you can have a world, if it's mathematic, you can have a world that has very wide scope because it has a lot of planets.
Yeah.
Even if you don't go a lot into each individual planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Star Wars is a good example of it, and it's a good example of how you can have low scope and still have a good story there.
Yeah.
In terms of like we cover a galaxy essentially, but everything that we're touching in the galaxy is very, very shallow.
Right.
Hoth is a snow planet because it is.
But there's like nothing going on for the most part on any of these planets besides, for all we know, Hoth is literally a soundstage where they have battles. It's just this one area that's snowy, and we know of one animal that lives there.
Yes.
That's it.
2.
What else? There's the Tauntauns and the
whatever the abominable snowman thing is.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that.
Called.
I forgot. Yeah, duh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's at least 2.
There's at least 2. You got that's true. So it's basically Alaska.
Yeah.
But it's true that especially in the early movies, they don't really go very far. That doesn't matter. They still give the illusion of depth.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I mean, even the title, Star Wars.
And it still feels epic without feeling bogged down.
It's true that as the scope of the world grows, it can get to be a little bit much on your story because you just don't have time to go into all these things. And again, you can kind of see that as some of the weaker Star Wars movies of like in Episode 1, I don't really need to know that much about the politics on Naboo,
right?
But they are kind of developed some.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about that though, we also said relative to the size of the world. When you're saying that, it's like relative to the size of your story.
Yeah.
So go a little bit into that. So what would be like, is there an example of a story that is smaller? Because Star Wars is still kind of big in scope. Is there an example of a story that's smaller that would be good for that sort of looking at scope?
Sure. I think you could look at the first Mistborn book or the Final Empire, depending on which version you got. But that pretty much, it all takes place in one city with like a little bit happening outside, but it's kind of like we went over here for maybe a chapter, didn't really develop it a ton.
Yeah.
It's just here's this other place that we have to kind of jump to and jump back to the main city.
It technically exists, but it's not that
Right,
relevant to the story.
but the city itself is very, very well developed.
Yeah, you get a very good feeling for what it's like to live there
Yeah.
and the people who live here.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that makes a lot of
So
sense.
very small scope in terms of, only a couple square miles or whatever it is. I'm not sure, but very deep.
Yeah.
There's probably others.
There's probably others. There's a a lot of other. I would think of even like, go ahead.
I would also use as a limited but deep world building setup is Majora's Mask from the
Sure.
Legend of Zelda series,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which I believe I've mentioned before is one of my favorite video games of
Yeah,
all time.
that's a great one.
And it's very much okay, we have your central hub, you
Yep.
have your 4 areas. That's
it.
Yeah, and and with the very structure of the game, you're forced to like keep delving into
Yes.
the small amount of this setting that you actually have to get to know the characters and such. But it's not super relevant everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's enough work put into the world building there to make that going back through not be incredibly boring.
Right.
And it's like, oh, there's actually still more
There's
stuff
still
to
more
discover
stuff
every
that I
time I'm
can-
going through my little Groundhog Day routine.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, it depends also again on like how much story there is there, because Majora's Mask is not a super long game, but it's still not that short since you're meant to play it over and over again. I think of something even like John Wick, the story in the movie is about this thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's not a lot of story in the world, but the world building matches. It's like just interesting enough where I'm like, I don't know why there's a guy with pigeons. That's kind of cool. Apparently, there's like spies everywhere and stuff.
Yeah.
Is the guy with the pigeons in the first movie or the second?
Second movie.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I skipped over 1 and saw like 2 and 3. But yeah, it's
okay.
because the first one is even smaller.
Oh, yeah,
it's
the first
very,
one
very
is,
small. It's
My dog.
it really is. A guy killed my dog. I'm going to go kill a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Yes. And as I go along, it's like, okay, there's like more going on besides John Wick was a good assassin.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's most of the story, and that's most of what you need to know. But anyway, it's the world doesn't get in the way of the story.
Yeah. I think another thing, and I think to some extent, I haven't seen all the John Wick movies, so they're not for me. But from what I have heard and from the 2 that I have seen, I think they develop their world very, very well based on the actual time that they are given. So you've got one movie, and the world building is essentially as low as it can go. It's just, here's the real world that everybody lives in. This guy happens to be a master assassin, and that's it. Yeah. And then the second one, we go, okay, well, now we've got 2 movies worth of time, so we need to delve a little bit more into this world. And then you go, okay, we've got 3 movies worth of time. We need to delve a little bit more. We need to flesh this out a little bit more. And then I think they've done 4 or 5 movies.
I don't remember now.
I don't.
We did 4.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen the 4th or the 5th or however many they're up to. I think I stopped at 3.
But that's true of like as you get more real estate in whatever it is that you're building story wise, then you have more real estate for world building. It's also very true for TTRPGs. If you're gonna run a D&D campaign, if you're running a one shot,
it's got to be small.
You better not do much world building. You're gonna be wasting everybody's time.
Yep. Why are we going into this dungeon? Money? Cool.
Yeah. Like you can have a cool setup, but
which, depending on your group, can also work for, a 50-session campaign.
Sure, yeah.
But if you have that much time, it's also fun to be, okay, actually, let's spend a little time getting into the motivations of the characters, the way that this world works.
Yeah, like you have time to breathe and actually grow with the story.
Yeah.
And you also run into problems with scope if you don't do that as you go longer. It's like, okay, well, we've already plumbed the depths of we needed money.
Right.
What's going on now, guys? We might need some deeper motivations going on and more than the basics.
Yep.
But yeah, and then so growing over time, I think we'll cover some of those a little later. I'm excited to talk about some of these stories that grow, the setting growing as the story progresses. Because it's just kind of the practical realities of making a story in the first place.
Yeah.
Like I even think of like a TV show. If it's not fantastical, you think of something like The Bear
Yeah.
The Bear cooking show. I don't think you've seen it.
I've not seen it.
Phenomenal.
It's a great show. You're working in a kitchen. It's a disastrous kitchen.
Yep.
Mom and pop shop trying to get it off the ground. The first season is very tight.
Very tight.
About like how do we make it?
How do we make sure that the restaurant stays open tomorrow?
And that's it.
And that's it.
In the second season, there's time to actually build up some more of what's going on.
Yep.
And who the characters are.
Yeah, I mean, you actually have characters that are like traveling outside the city.
Yes, it's not. We're not confined to this 2 sets that we had.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's just in the practical reality of you get 1 season of a TV show.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of constraints that we have to work under always. Of like, again, if you're going to do an RPG campaign, it's like, okay, well, I only got this much time to prep. I have to build a world. My scope has to match my actual physical time.
Right. And I think it's doubly important as an author, like writing novels, is go, what length of a book am I writing? So if I'm writing just a singular novel, it's got to be, your writing's got to be really tight. Your world building has to be tight, constricted. Like we can't go into this massive world and learn this incredibly in-depth magic system, because at least for me as a reader, that's going to bore me if 25%+ of the novel is just, here's how the world works. It's like, okay, but what's happening?
Yeah. To go back to an example you used earlier, like Mistborn, as the series goes on, there's an incredible amount of world building.
Yeah.
But the first book is like about,
you get the basics.
You get the basics because I don't care.
Yeah.
Like I just don't. I haven't bought in yet.
Right.
I see it a lot too. Reading, like being in critique groups and reading a lot of things that are in progress for writing.
Yeah.
Sometimes, someone will be writing a novel, and it's like, look, I get it. This stuff's cool, but we can't spend this much time talking about the titles of characters because. As a reader, I don't care anymore. Like your audience isn't gonna do it. You're over budget. You've run out of attention. Or you physically run out of time. You can't.
So there's a question that we don't actually have written out as something to talk about. But what do you think about things that are just left essentially unanswered, intentionally left unanswered, where it's just like, this is a part of the world, we're not talking about it? So are those kinds of things okay? Do they help kind of give you the sense of a living, breathing world that I don't get to know everything about it?
Yeah.
And then at what point do you start to get frustrated where you're just like, this thing didn't get paid off?
Right. It's like taking out a loan on your scope budget for the audience.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where an example I think of that did a very good job, at least, of the taking out the loan part, was Lost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? Where by the end of the first season, basically nothing has been answered, but you know that there's all this world building and all these questions that you have about the way that things work.
Yeah, and you're like really excited to know
what
any of the things mean.
Right. And if you just stop at the end of the first season, you still have no idea what's going on.
Right.
And if you stop at the end of the second season, however, you still have no idea what's going on.
and if you make it all the way through the whole series,
you still have no idea what's going on.
You get to the end and realize that he never intended to pay off the loan. He just kept taking out a loan on your attention.
But in terms of like the thing that impresses me the most is how long though they managed to get away with that.
Sure.
I was still invested like in season 4 and season 5 like I want to know what's going on. I want to know about this world.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like the second to last or last season where I was like, okay, I don't care.
And I guess my question is more,
is that good?
No, not necessarily is that good, but if you knew going into it, X, Y, and Z will not get paid off. Yeah. How does that affect your?
I think it depends a lot on what is or isn't, what is being not explained, because there's a difference between basically setting up Chekhov's gun and you have this thing that you set up and we're waiting for it, and loss is a big problem of like there's a lot of these questions that are very integral to our basic understanding of the story and also why we would even care.
Right.
So if you don't pay these off, I'm going to feel unfulfilled. Versus an example of a series that does it very well is Harry Potter, where there's the illusion of depth in all the places that you don't actually need to know.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to know anything about the other wizarding schools.
Right. We know that
understand
they're
it,
there, and that's it. That's all I need.
right? And they'll throw out enough key differences or things that you're like, oh, that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
I would want to know about that. That's it, though. We don't actually get to see it because it doesn't really
It doesn't matter to Harry.
Mm-hmm. And so they're just props set up in the room that you don't need to see the backside of.
Yeah.
It becomes a problem when we can see the mic peeking into the frame. And we're like, okay, sir, you did need to say something about what's going on. It's not enough. Mystery doesn't carry on forever.
Right. And I think that's I think that might be the defining thing is like, if this is something that you've put in as a mystery box, then the natural tendency is, well, I want to see what's in the mystery box. But if you just set it up as just like, if it's very clear going into it, there's nothing like secret or special going on in this thing. It just is, it's a part of the world. It doesn't really matter. It's just, I needed this character to come from somewhere, and he comes from this place, and this place does this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a danger you have with a mystery box in general.
Yeah.
Like in the mystery box style of storytelling, or when you're trying to set up things in your world.
Yeah.
Like the things that people imagine in their mind will most likely be more interesting than what you actually reveal.
Right.
So you just have to be, that's not always true. There are cases where it gets paid off well. Again, I'll use an example that some of the people in the audience might know. You guys, I don't think, have gotten that far. In Attack on Titan.
Okay.
The answers to the questions are more interesting than I was expecting. And so I was like, so as I kept going, I was like, I really want to know more.
Yeah.
Because you actually pay this thing that you set up in the first episode. It actually does have a meaning that's very interesting. Like this, I care. This was good.
Sure.
Versus most series, it's like, we'll figure it out later.
Right.
Depending on the size of the question, like in later Star Wars, who is Rey? It's like, well, they clearly didn't know initially,
right?
But they tried to set it up as an interesting question. And like paying it off or not paying it off. It's like, okay, we pop the box open, and it's like, oh,
it was an interesting question to begin with.
Exactly.
I was curious.
Exactly. It's like I was curious. I wanted to know.
I was not.
And then they opened the box, and it was like,
care.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The mystery box phenomenon can also happen when you're on the author side of the world building process.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes you could come up with this great little seedling of an idea of, oh, it'd be really cool if, in this corner of my continent, I had this country here. And you want to go flesh that out, but sometimes you don't have the time constraints. And you need to say, okay, that's great. I don't have time to get into this. I'm just going to set that aside and for now, pretend it does not exist and focus on these things that are important to the actual
I've run
story.
into that quite a bit in RPG prep of like, oh, I could have this over here and this. And it's like, well, your characters aren't on that continent right now. So leave it alone.
Yes. Right? That's where the whole world builder's disease thing becomes a real problem of like, you really want to invest in the aspects of the world that you find interesting, but they're just out of... You don't have the physical time to get through them.
And bringing it back to scope, like defining your scope early on can help limit that world builder's disease of just that's not a scope that I'm dealing with right now. This is the scope of my story. This is what I need to define to build. Yeah. And then if I decide I'm gonna build off of this book, this screenplay, this RPG, whatever I want to build and make this world fleshed out, then get to that in a later book, in a later whatever, where you've got that time to fill in that other place, that other race, that other whatever it is.
And it's something where RPGs are very good at being able to test it out with your audience and see what they think is interesting, because you can set up 30 seedlings. And then if people really care, okay, then I can actually invest the time. It's not going to be wasted developing it. You can't do that as cleanly when it comes to writing or something.
No, because you've got to write it before anybody sees it.
You do. That's true.
The seedling's got to grow before anyone can look at it and go, I hate that tree.
But like, you can still be careful to keep your initial book scope, your initial story, and any of these things small enough that people will care. And you might be able to like sell it and have a person buy us, but you have room to grow. You see that a lot with any of these stories where it's like starting small, ending big, like Red Rising. First book is very, very, very tight in scope.
Yep.
There's a lot of what seems like the illusion of depth. They're like, there's all these races, whatever.
Yep.
It doesn't matter. We got time for a battle school.
Yeah.
And then the latter two books, it's like, oh, actually, there was a lot going on the whole time. We just couldn't.
Well, and
go.
I think that also works really, really well as an example of what we're talking about, because in that first book, you're introduced not to all, but most of the colors.
Yes.
And you're given it a in-depth explanation.
Colors being in Red Rising, just as a quick setup, if you haven't read anything and don't know anything about it, Red Rising is a sci-fi story, and in it,
it's a class system where different classes are given different colors.
And isn't it like their skin? Is it
No.
No. Okay. And some of them.
I mean, to an extent,
gold people who are physically gold. I don't understand
I think
why.
that's about it.
I don't know. That part is there's definitely some genetic.
Yeah, there's
modification.
because they're also like huge compared
like
to everybody else except for the Obsidians.
Yes. But yes, when he's talking about colors, there's caste systems.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're introduced to the red guys, they work in a mine.
Yeah.
And the gold guys are on top. Blah blah blah.
Right, and you get red, you get gold, you kind of get pink, and that's it.
Yeah, and they say there's
and
like
you
blue
get stuff mentioned
all
of
they
all
say.
the other colors, but it's kind of
Right,
you don't know what they do.
Right, as the reader, you just know, okay, this is not
exist.
the entirety of the colors. There are others out there.
Right.
They're not important right now.
Right, but you have the promise of, I know there are two well, there's more now, but I know that there are two more in this trilogy, and I have the assurance that my questions at least can be answered in the future.
Yes.
Right.
There's still room for it, rather than
Yeah.
getting towards the end of a movie and you're like, I guess I will never know something.
Yeah.
There's one in particular.
There's 15 minutes left, and we're not getting there.
Exactly. There's one in particular I want to talk about later. 'Cause it's a
Yeah,
big
we'll get to
problem
it.
with. But it's like, so yeah, you need to be able to keep your scope to something reasonable that your story can actually handle.
Yeah.
Um.
So with that, what are some examples of like a low scope story, and how do you do that well? Because I don't want to make the idea that high scope good, low scope bad.
Right.
Because I don't think that's true.
No.
Even
like I won't do. We can do. There are better examples that we will do. But like one of my favorite superhero movies is Logan. Very
phenomenal.
Phenomenal movie. Very low scope for a superhero movie. I need to save the girl. That's the whole movie.
Yeah.
And it's with high scope, it gets a lot harder to do an actual focused character story.
Yeah.
Low scope really lends itself to that. There's enough world building to know that this is kind of post-apocalyptic. Now.
Yep.
But that's mostly all you need to know. Oh yeah, most of the superheroes are gone.
Yeah.
But that's about all you need
and
to know.
conveniently for that movie, it comes all of at least the main heroes that they use are all ones that everyone's familiar with, so you don't even have to like go into this is Wolverine, this is how his powers work.
No. It's assumed that
and
you
have
can,
an idea. So you can immediately, starting in the first like 5 minutes of the movie, you can start it and go, everybody watching the movie realizes that's not how Wolverine is supposed to be. Something's going wrong.
Yes.
If you don't have to build the character and then have something go wrong.
Yes. And the thing about doing low scope well is it essentially means that since you can't do a lot of world building, you need to rely on what your audience already knows. So your story would tend to either be more realistic or you're relying on a lot of fantasy or sci-fi tropes that your audience is going to already be familiar with. Like in the case of Logan, it's assumed the audience already knows what a superhero is and how all this works. We don't need to do the whole Peter Parker gets bit by a spider sort of shtick, right? It's this is where we're at. You know what's going on. Let's just tell the story. And when you're doing something that's set closer to reality, like if you want to just set your story in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and you're writing two people who are in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
It is a real city.
Just as a random example.
Just a random example.
There really is a Kalamazoo. You can just mention Oakland Street and everybody reading will know exactly what you're talking about. And you don't have to spend 2 paragraphs describing every shop that's on it.
Right. Exactly. And that's kind of the advantage to using, like you said, to using pre-built stuff. Like in D&D, it's like, okay, everybody knows what an orc is and what an elf is.
Yep.
I don't have to
Cool.
explain
There we go.
versus like, oh, an asymmer. Okay, I actually need to like.
Okay, we gotta
tell
have to
people
kind of explain this.
what's
Yeah.
going on. Do we have another good example of low scope?
I think another. I mean, I mentioned it briefly at the beginning. I think Star Wars is a good example of low scope. At least the original trilogy.
Is it? I like the idea, but why would we consider Star Wars to be low scope? Because
I think while the scope is broad, its depth is an inch. Yeah. And so I think it works because of what it's designed to be. It's designed to be fun.
Like
right.
it does.
Also,
it
like
go on.
X-wings are like they're Mustangs, right?
Yeah.
They're fighter planes. They're not actual spaceships that do spaceshipy things.
No,
they fly around, they shoot each other, and they drop bombs.
Right.
Especially they get less so. Even in the original trilogy, they get less so as movies go on. The first one's like, remember World War II?
Right.
Okay, guys, World War II, but we're in space, kind of. Yeah, and in the original trilogy, things are kept very vague in a good way. The Force is a thing. It's called the Force.
Right.
Which, if we take a step back, that's like a terrible name for
it.
it.
And even like with the Jedi, it's just like there was an order of people. They could use the Force, and they had flashlight swords.
Yes.
And that's it. We don't have we don't have any mention of the Jedi Council. We don't have any mention of the High Republic. Any of that. None of that's there.
Were the Sith even mentioned? I think it was just there's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And the way that the Force is used in the climax is essentially trust your instincts,
yeah,
which is something that doesn't need a whole lot of world building to get across.
So even though there's clearly a broad scope, because there's a lot of planets that I'm assuming aren't close together, because in the second movie it took a while for them to like travel around.
Yeah, I mean it's left very vague. I mean, also you've got light speed though, so you can kind of hop pretty quickly between one and another. Yeah.
It's kept very vague in a good way, but there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah,
there's a lot of fighting.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, there's just a few spaceships, a lightsaber. We don't need to know how they work.
Yep.
We don't need to know the Emperor does lightning because that looks like
because it looks cool.
And Luke is a good guy.
Yep. You know. Yeah, I think I would argue that it is low scope, and I think it does a really, really good job with it.
And it does. Okay, the other thing about low scope is we do know a little bit about the production of Star Wars, and so it makes sense in terms of Lucas and the creative team did not spend a lot of time up front to build a massive world. They built enough to do the movie. It's a lot more realistic for people than like the prequel trilogy. Take them how you will.
Sure.
It's kind of not a realistic creative environment for most people. They basically had like unlimited money and time to make the movies.
Yeah.
Versus for us, it's like low scope is very attractive because you can just tell a story. You don't have to worry about building everything out. But high scope also has big advantages if it's done really well, because your world can be a selling point for your story.
Like James Cameron's Avatar series.
Yes.
Yep. Where you have this group of aliens that has their own language, and they've developed their language for this, even though I haven't seen the movies. Oh. But I'm guessing you don't need to know the language as the viewer to actually understand that.
No,
but that's and that's a lot of the appeal of like Star Trek as it's called.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you got all the races that have developed languages and cultures in history.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's a decent comparison of Star Wars versus Star Trek. Is like they both have aliens, but the Star Wars aliens are just they're there. I was just like, well, we had these Muppets and we figured we'd throw them on there.
I don't even. To be fair, like, are any of the Star Wars alien races named in the movies, like ever? I know some names because like I've played a video game and stuff. It's like the Twi'lek are the people with the thing on their head.
Gungan, right?
The Gungans, yes.
Yeah, I think some of them probably are.
But besides like
as like a throwaway,
like prequel stuff, they name them. But besides that, the names of the alien races or their cultures are irrelevant. It's basically just episode 1, and that's it. And a little bit episode 2 maybe. The bugs.
Oh yeah, I don't. Whatever they are.
I don't remember the name.
Versus Star Trek, yeah, it's very core that you would know
Yeah.
the difference between Vulcans and Romulans
Yeah.
and Klingons.
Yeah.
The Klingons and Romulans are related and
Right. And it matters
yes.
to the stories. So I think that's a good example.
I feel like Brandon Sanderson has just made a career off of having high scope. That's like his selling point is I will build a massive world.
Yep.
And it works. I mean,
absolutely.
Like we talked about Mistborn, which starts very tight but gets to be very massive scope. Makes sense too in terms of like it was very early in his career. He had to actually pitch it. Versus like The Way of Kings. I know you've read The Way of Kings. Have you read The Way of Kings, Brandon?
Yeah, I've read 3 or 4 of those.
Okay.
No, 3. I've read the first 3 of the Stormlight.
I've read the first 3 as well.
Okay.
You've read the first one.
First one. Listen,
this-
technically. But
I mean,
yes.
But that was the one I wanted to talk about anyway. It's like The Way of Kings
starts out big
it starts out like
and gets bigger.
I would argue too big, but that's just preferences. I don't like prologues very much. And the book starts out with like 3 consecutive prologues.
Yeah.
It's like in the audiobook, it was like maybe an hour and a half before we get to the actual
what's
story.
going on right now.
And so much of it doesn't make any sense until you're like 3 books in.
Yeah.
You would even begin to be able to understand what's going on.
Yep.
But that's okay. Like it's setting up a lot of mystery boxes that you trust the author to solve in an interesting way.
Yeah. And we can look at his other works and go like, okay, there's a reason to have this trust here.
Yes.
Like we have seen him do this, and he fulfills those mystery boxes.
Yes. It's when I open this, I will be happy.
Yes.
Building that requires a good amount of buy-in. And you can, again, if we go to something closer to something we could do, because it's hard to start out with a 1,000-page novel. But like you can do the same thing in an RPG, but you do kind of need buy-in from your players of like, well, do the players have a reason to invest time to understand what's going on?
Yep.
So
the other thing about having such a large scope up front like that is for something like The Way of Kings, like the individual stories of the characters are actually fairly, maybe predictable is not the right way of putting it, but they're not, like the stories themselves aren't super complex and sort of like the beats that they're following initially of like,
no. They're very simple.
Yeah. Of like,
Shallan,
and sort of her little Disney princess. I want to go be somebody in the world.
Yeah.
Like for the first half of the book or so, you sort of see all those beats coming as they happen. And if you're a particularly astute reader, you probably even see a lot of the later ones happening.
Yeah.
Which means that you can then worry about more of the world building and less about what's going on with the character because it's so obvious.
Yes. And there's like, and Shallan has more going on later, but they don't. He doesn't make you deal with all of that
immediately.
Because a counterexample that does it in my mind poorly. I know they're not very popular cult classics. The Malazan series. I read the first one of these books. It was okay, but I think the first 10 chapters started with a different point of view.
Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
And each of the characters were like actual complex characters with real motivations, but I didn't know what they were. And so it's like, okay, this is a bat. No, it was some kind of large bird that could also talk and become a human maybe sometimes.
Okay.
Apparently there are dragons.
I haven't read it, so I don't.
No, it's fair. It's a good point that like if the world building is out here and huge, it can be very helpful to the audience if the character stories stay small and tight and understandable, so that they have something to latch onto rather than you can focus on what's going on out there. And that sort of thing wouldn't work in a story like even Star Wars because we just don't have time to be investing into how a lightsaber is built.
Right.
You just don't have time for that. All right.
And if you really want to invest that time, cool. We now have 50 TV shows and and all of this other stuff that we can go like, cool. Yeah, we can spend 2 episodes in the Clone Wars detailing how a lightsaber gets built.
Exactly.
Fine.
Did either of you guys ever play Knights of the Old Republic?
Parts.
No, I have not.
I know we have a friend who is mutual friend who's has it very close to his heart. I don't know. I feel like Knights of the Old Republic is the reason I bring it up is it's the perfect example of how that works for Star Wars of like, because it's a long RPG, you actually have some time to get into world building.
Yep.
To deal with things that otherwise just don't fit in a movie. It could fit in a novel, but it's better suited here in terms of how some of these things work, the Jedi Order and different factions and all that sort of thing.
The other advantage about having like a video game RPG is you can allow the player to choose how much of that world they want to explore.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you can just sort of have a more simplified, okay, here's the main plot, the thing that you actually care about. And if you don't care about the other stuff, that's fine. You don't have to do it.
You can just ignore the side quests and not learn about the characters or read any of that stuff. You can just play the video.
You can do the same thing in a tabletop RPG, but that's a little bit more difficult because then you have to prepare for, are the players going to be interested in this side quest or not?
Exactly.
And then if they're not, it's, I spent all this time preparing it and I didn't get to spend as much time preparing the thing that they actually care about now.
Exactly.
Well, and you've also got in a video game RPG, you've got one person making all of the decisions. So it's just kind of just like whatever I want, I can go and do that. Whereas in a tabletop RPG, you've got 3+ people who are all have different things that they want to do, and part of it has to do with I'm a different character and my character has different motivations, and some of it is just like I'm a different real person and my real person just wants to bash heads and this real person wants to have deep meaningful character conversations. You're like, we gotta have a little bit of both somehow.
Exactly. It's cool. We all care about the world, but I don't care about the religion. I just wanted to talk up to the character.
Right, exactly. And that was
what's going on.
That was actually something that I can kind of speak to. So for initially with the campaign that I'm currently running, I didn't have any clerics. So it was just like, oh, cool. Religion doesn't matter. Yeah. Like it's there. It's a very thin layer. And then somebody was like, hey, my wife is really interested. Could she play? And I was like, sure. And she's like, I really want to play a cleric. It's like, I now need to go do this.
Yes. And the scope expands just that much more.
Exactly. Yes. Like just like the different kinds of characters that you have involved is like, oh, okay, I've got to curate it for what kind of character you're playing now.
Right. Yes. Like, I can't imagine how difficult and how long it was to take Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Like, with the amount of... Because they basically have to do that, but for the individual player of, hey, what if you wanted to go into this?
Yeah.
The world has to be there for you.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think they do a good job from what I've seen.
From what I've seen.
I haven't played it, but I've watched some Let's Plays.
That's a game I'm a little afraid to play, so...
Just because of how much time you'd sink into
it? Even if I don't know if I would end up doing, but if I played it, it'd be like, am I going to spend 500 hours to play the game? I want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
How far did you get into Divinity Original Sin 2?
Divinity.
That's a long title.
It is a long title.
Great title. Yeah, clearly.
Also weird title.
I'll be honest, I played a good amount of it. I don't know what the original sin would be at all. I'm completely
because
I think it's eating an apple. Usually
I know that original sin, but in this there's not. It's just like D&D basically. So I don't know. In that game I played, I don't know, like maybe 40 hours or something. I did not finish that game. So it's a little
okay.
I only played with other people. That was a good example of like the RPG, basically tabletop RPG side gone wrong, because it's basically a tabletop RPG that you play in a video game.
Yep.
But like half of the party was familiar with the game, they just wanted to skip ahead,
and
half of us were not. So it was like, I guess I won't know any of the
story. I won't know anything that's going on
because they're speed running.
Right. They're saying, okay, we're gonna go here and talk to this guy. I'm like, but why? Well, because he has a thing that we need. How would I know that? Well, if you talk to this other guy over here, but we never did.
It's like, oh, you talked to him on the other playthrough. I see.
Yeah.
Anyway. We're going to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
The segment that I've been excited for, we are going to be talking budgeting. Now, I know we started here and it came down.
Topic.
We're like, oh man, it's like a tier list or whatever. But no, we're going to be doing some budgets on stories, but not for money or anything like that.
My inner accountant is now so sad.
Mine would be if he was there. We have scope budget. So we're going to talk about some different stories, some movies, in fact, we have mostly movies. Well, that's fine.
Yeah, we do actually.
We're going to talk about some different stories and about their scope budget.
And we've got some that are both movies and books, but were originally books.
Yeah. And these are ones where they're close enough where
they're
basically the same story. But we're going to be talking about if these movies or stories or whatever are over budget for their scope, under budget for their scope, or just perfect.
Yeah.
Now, so when we talk about a scope budget, you have the scope that your story has. We talked about low scope versus high scope, right?
Yeah.
When you are making, this is especially true when you are actually making something, there's only so much time that you have.
Yeah.
And so your world building, you have a scope for the amount of, you have your scope perfectly match how much time you have to make the story.
Yep.
Okay.
And perfectly match like the length of the story. But in some cases, you end up with too much world for the amount of time you have to actually develop it. And so it just ends up being really poorly done. It's overblown.
Yeah.
And then the other world that's less perfect is when you have not enough time to develop your story. And so there's a lot of interesting things that just never get developed. They just never make it out of the basic stage.
Right.
Yeah.
You just don't have time. They're under budget.
Yep.
So let's talk about Marvel movies. Now with Marvel movies, I feel like there's two eras you can always take. You have the MCU, and then you have everything that came after Endgame came out.
I like how you say there's the MCU, and then there's this other stuff. I
guess that's not part of the MCU.
That's not part of the MCU.
I'm just saying, if any person has seen the Eternals, you would say this is not the same thing.
It is not.
This is just
I think up to Endgame is perfect, or maybe a little bit under budget. I think there are some things that they kind of teased that never really got fulfilled. Yeah. But I still felt very satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that of every single movie in that realm of Iron Man 1 to Endgame. I wouldn't say that every single movie is perfectly budgeted. But I think overall, it kind of everything that I wanted to happen and everything that I wanted answered was answered. There were a couple little plot threads here and there that kind of are like, I don't really know what's gonna happen with that. And some of them have gone on to get explained in later movies. Some of them well, some of them not.
Were there. Yeah, it happened. But for the most part, they did a good job. Like, there's the burrs stick out of like I feel like Thor 1 and 2 were a little bit over of like I don't know why.
It's just really high concept stuff that was not explained well.
Like how many? Is it the 9 realms? Is that what it is?
Sure.
With Asgard,
was that?
That's just Norse mythology, right? I can't remember how many realms there are.
I believe it's 9 realms.
Sounds right.
But they like made it a point in the first movie, and they talked about like 2.5.
Yep.
There's Asgard, there was Earth, and then wherever Loki came from.
Yeah.
The Frost Giants.
Yeah.
But that's about as far as most people know about the actual Norse mythology, though.
It was more annoying because like there was a lot I wanted to know about the Frost Giants because it became very relevant that Loki is part 1 and he's not very giant.
Yeah.
Or frosty.
Yeah.
True.
And then they pretty much just ignored that after that movie. It's like it's unimportant. It has nothing to do with this character whatsoever.
There's also like just a billion characters introduced that for the most part never receive any relevance. There's like Heimdall is cool and he gets stuff. That's about it. The bridge man. But then on the other side, most Marvel movies did a really good job of staying very much within what you cared about.
Yep.
The fact that they were able to do it with movies like Avengers is crazy. Of like, I care. They basically answered everything I cared about in that movie.
Yeah, and it's impressive because with that many main characters, the ability to go over budget it would be so easy.
Yes.
And the fact that they managed to balance it well.
Yes.
For all 4 of the Avengers movies, especially the latter 2, where there's just so many people.
Infinity War was like a miracle that happened.
Yeah, that it worked and that I cared about pretty much what everybody had going on.
Yep.
Like it all mattered. With some exceptions, but the fact that it was 90+% of the cast was important and relevant is crazy.
Yes.
Yes.
Like I don't know how many other franchises would have time for like the detour they made to make Thor's new hammer.
Right.
But it's still when
It
we already
worked.
had this
It
much stuff
worked.
going on.
Yeah.
The giant man. Apparently
Yes.
we had time for him.
Yeah,
in
we had
the,
time
in the
for him.
forge.
It
And
worked.
it was cool. It was a
Yeah.
great scene.
Yep.
Infinity War and what's it called?
No.
Endgame. Sorry, go ahead.
That did make me think, man, where were these dwarves? I don't know, the past 20 movies.
Yeah.
It would have been cool to at least like know they would have existed.
Yeah.
I think the Thor stuff is where they have the most trouble with that.
Sure.
It's
Yes.
All the Thor adjacent characters. I'm assuming they're part of one of the other 9 realms, and
Seems
They-
Oh,
reasonable.
there you go. Sure.
they have their own stuff going on, so they can't help or something. Endgame also got a little bit more sloppy
It
with
did.
its world building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'll be honest, I cared a little bit more about Hulk becoming smart that didn't get established.
Yeah.
And it felt like that was relevant.
Yeah.
Captain Marvel is like,
She shows up.
Yep.
I need to. You can't just say a throwaway line like there's earthquakes or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, like,
I have to go.
I felt like it'd be important to know.
All right. Seems like
Yeah.
bringing back half of the universe is a little bit more important than whatever you're off to, but okay.
Okay, but it's as a whole, taken as a whole, all the movies pretty close to perfect.
Yeah.
and
Yes.
And
the other-
certainly
go on.
collectively, I would say they are
Collectively.
perfect.
Yeah. And like I guess the biggest testament to that is at the end I felt satisfied. It was like I'm happy with this, and there weren't really any characters I was like, man, I really wish I had. I was like, no, I'm cool
Right.
with all the main cast.
And you feel you have a pretty good grasp on how the world works
Yes.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Well, so yeah, Endgame had a couple of problems with the whole wait, but what's with the timelines now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's up with that? But
But it was
That's
it
also
was
one
on
of
an
those-
acceptable level.
yeah, it's sort of like okay, yeah, but you have to make the story work, so I get it.
Yes. That part at least worked, and then they kept making the movies.
Then they
Yeah.
kept making the movies.
Those, I think, I think there are some, like there have been some of the movies and even some of the TV shows that have come out that I have thought this is good.
Mhm.
Some of it I would even say like this is really good.
Yeah.
I think overall, and I've mostly fallen off at this point. It's
Same.
just gotten way too over budget. Like the
Yeah.
amount of
Mhm.
stuff they're trying to cram in,
Yep.
it just makes it's hard to get invested because there's too many individual things to be invested with.
Yep.
And it
Yes.
is so interconnected now.
Yes.
Where the movies prior, where it was kind of like there was some interconnection, and it helped to watch them like before the Avengers movies because you don't get an explanation. Like if you don't see Captain America, he shows up in the Avengers movies, and he's a fine character, but you're just like, here's this dude.
Yep.
Know nothing about him. All right.
American guy, apparently. Yeah.
I think they just I think they had like this really nice power ramping up to
Yes.
Thanos and then didn't know how to start from
Exactly.
zero
Yep.
again, and so they wanted to be already back at that level, and it's like, but there's too much.
I would.
Yep. For me, the world building began to fall apart actually as a result of what I perceived as a storytelling issue,
Oh, interesting.
which is that the screenwriters were not willing to leave half of the world
Yeah.
Thanosified,
Sure.
you know? And so once they walked all of that back, then I had a hard time getting invested in anything because there's no point in me getting invested into this because any consequences of this, you just might go ahead and undo.
Yeah.
So
it is the.
what does any of this matter?
Yep.
It's funny. They did the classic comic book problem of like
Yeah.
we just nothing is permanent anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And it is like it was a cool solution that they had in Infinity War, or in Endgame, but it was
Endgame,
still like it did kind of cut the stakes a lot.
Yeah. Like
And-
what's keeping you from building another time machine that you already know how to build, going back, getting those same stones, redoing it
Well,
again?
they're in a different place now or a different time. It just gets
Right.
confusing.
Yeah. And
I would, and not to spend forever on MCU.
Yeah.
I would agree that I think everything after Endgame, 90% of the problems could be pinned to scope. Even like I know
Yeah.
it was more popular. The last Spider-Man movie, I really disliked.
I didn't like it either.
I thought it was very cheap to just bring in a lot of characters and have it be a lot about that. And the story itself just didn't work then very well. Of like, okay, we're trying to rehabilitate villains who are now by nature different characters,
right?
They are. Did you see?
I've not seen it's the third one, right?
Yeah.
I've seen the first two. In fact, I think I own the first one, which is like one of the few movies that I own. But
yeah, I really liked
I've not seen
Homecoming.
the third.
That was great.
Second one was ambitious, I guess. There was very cool parts. The third movie was like, okay, I don't really see it. Or Shang-Chi, liked that movie too.
I liked the first 2/3 of that movie were phenomenal.
But that was the problem. It's like, did you see Shang-Chi or no?
I did not.
But Shang-Chi had the world of like 2 to 3 movies crammed into one movie. And it's like, I don't have time for second world fantasy.
And there's a distinct cut where you're like, cool, very invested in this world. And then you get about 2/3 of the way through the movie and they're like, forget all of that. We're in this world now.
And here's
like,
7 new
characters. I don't care about that at all, though.
I don't have time. It's super over budget. And that's not to mention the bad movies. They're all the same. It's way worse.
Yep.
Now, that's an over budget movie.
Yep.
Hideously over budget.
Yeah.
I want to bring a different movie to you guys. This one, I know a lot of people love this movie. And I've personally gotten into arguments about this.
I've been there.
It's too much time.
Not arguing, just kind of sitting going, all right, guys.
Interstellar.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that movie.
Cool.
It's like Christopher Nolan movies. It's like most of them we could just say it's
phenomenal.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Tremendous. Everyone loves Inception.
Great movie.
Everyone who's seen it loves The Prestige.
And perfectly budgeted, I would say.
Perfectly budgeted.
Yep.
Interstellar. Talk to me. You said you like it.
I like it. Yeah.
I think it's fine. I do agree with you, or I agree with where I think you're gonna go and say that it's under budgeted. Of just there's a lot of stuff going on that it's like I would really like to know a little bit more about what's going on instead of just kind of science.
There are a few too many unanswered questions in that movie for me, and the problem is that it's a Christopher Nolan movie, and I tend to assume that he knows what he's doing, and so for me, it's hard to tell. Okay, is this because the movie was not being world built sufficiently enough, or is the problem that I am the viewer and I'm just too unintelligent to actually figure out what is going on?
Right. It's like, am I dumb or is this bad? I don't know.
Are you actually playing 5D chess in this 5D realm, or
right? Or is the music really too loud in the scene so I can't hear what's going on?
Yeah, I think what I would say the issue with that movie, because I think I like most of the movie.
Yeah.
And I think like when they're going and visiting the different planets and how those different planets are affected by different things, cool, love it, super invested.
Yep.
I think the issue is the big mystery box that he sets up at the beginning. Mm-hmm. The payoff of it is so under budget for what it was presented as.
Yeah.
Yes.
He basically budgeted himself 5 to 10 minutes to solve the film.
Yeah.
And that might have been fine if it didn't feel like Interstellar took a hard pivot from all the things that were actually set up. And so it felt under budget because the whole explanation basically didn't have any build up besides love is important.
Yeah.
Right. So what did we spend the last 3 hours watching for then?
Exactly. We had all this interesting science stuff that is actually not relevant to
the
solution of the movie.
Yeah.
And it just didn't feel very well established, which really stinks because there was a lot, the movie as a whole, there's a lot of things that it does very well, a lot of things it does very well from a storytelling perspective, but the world just falls apart.
It falls apart.
And even post the solution,
what's going
on?
Yeah.
The last shot of the film, you're like, why is this here? Why did we showing?
What's the last shot of the film again?
Is Anne Hathaway on the planet with a bunch of people?
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And you're like, but why?
Why?
How?
What's going on?
I'm lost now.
Yeah.
You're losing me.
Yeah.
So I feel like that would be an example of under budget they're just there just was not a lot actually built up around the core of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. And do you think it would have worked better if the mystery box wasn't there? Or do you think the movie wouldn't have worked?
No, I think if he had made that movie similar to how he's made, like there's kind of two Nolan films that you can get. You either get the high concept with multiple twist movie, or you get the much more grounded kind of like the Dunkirks, which is like it's shot very interesting, or Oppenheimer, where it's like it's shot very interestingly, but there's nothing that it's like there's no big twist. We all know what happens at the end of Oppenheimer, even if you haven't seen the movie. Like you understand what's going on.
Hopefully,
right? Like, it follows that story. It does it in an interesting Nolan-esque way. Another example would be the Batman movies, where like there's twists and turns, but they're not a high concept twist and turn where you've got this mystery box that keeps getting stuff put in it and put in it and put in it. And you're like, how is he going to pay this off? And then something like The Prestige or Interstellar, it gets paid off and you're like, oh, that's great. And looking back at it, the whole movie makes sense in light of this new information that's revealed, and I feel super duper satisfied.
Interstellar is the
opposite.
You get to the end, you're like, wait, but why?
The box was empty the whole time?
Well,
all right.
The box was literally the friends we made along the way. Is that was
if you want the box was empty the whole time, go watch Inception, which is actually the box.
Right.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's done well, those high concept movies. Both Interstellar and not Interstellar, Inception and The Prestige wasn't the same conclusion, but they're both movies that you think about afterwards.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And you want to watch again. Interstellar, I was good. I was like, okay.
Yep. I have not watched it since.
I watched part of it again, didn't get through the whole movie, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that this is like a really good movie for the part that we watched.
I think if it was shot more as just like, this is just a movie. This is just like the story it's a space opera, more or less. I think it would be a great movie.
I even think it has like a good climax, but then the movie keeps going. Like the part before the movie jumps over the shark, which we're basically spoiling Interstellar. But I'm sorry.
It's an old movie. If you haven't seen it yet, that's on you.
And it's not that good. Well, it's good, but it's not. But like and
everybody's talked about it. So if you somehow have been under a rock, one, how did you find us? Welcome.
We appreciate you.
We're glad that you're here. But two, how have you not seen or at least heard of Interstellar?
So the power of love stuff is like the actual conclusion, but I thought that it's one of, again, I don't like the movie that much, but it's one of my favorite scenes in a movie is the scene with him and Matt Damon's character and the abrupt ending with Matt Damon's character's death. It was like, that was it was very well done. It was like a very strong climax to the movie.
Yeah.
But then it kept going.
Yep.
So that is a movie that we would say would be under budget.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right. The last thing we want to go over, it's not one. I want to talk about two.
All right.
And do a contrast.
Yeah.
And see about which one do you guys think is more poorly budgeted, and which one is more goodly budgeted? We have the two series that are kind of sister series in a lot of ways because for both books and film. No, because the thing is, we got Harry Potter and Hunger Games, which, not to bore everyone to death, they're the two games that like blew up the book publishing industry because it was like Harry Potter was. I won't make that joke. Harry Potter was the first big success. I'm sorry. There's like two controversial ways I can take this. And I don't want to.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're going to say, and we don't need to go into it.
Harry Potter was the first one of like, wow, this was amazing. You could actually make money making a book for kids, and it's like and making a long series. Could anyone do this again? Turns out you could. It was called The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
And then the movies did the exact same thing of like, wow, this long movie series made a lot of dollars. Hunger Games did the same thing.
Yep.
So in a lot of ways, they're actually very similar.
Yeah.
These are unfortunately two book series and two movie series that I have not read or watched. So
well, cool. Xavier and I will talk for a bit.
But at least for these ones, they're also so
embedded in the cultural zeitgeist that, especially Harry Potter. Like,
right. But
I have yet to read the Harry Potter books. I saw the movies when I was probably in my early 20s. But even before then, I knew roughly everything that happens.
And everyone is and they've done such a good job that everyone is familiar with what the Hunger Games are, roughly.
Yeah.
There's a battle royale.
Yep.
Kids fight to the death.
Yeah.
They're also both series that are very heavily, and they rely very heavily on world building.
Absolutely. And I think they both do a good job of it to start.
So especially Harry Potter, it's interesting the way that Harry Potter's scope budget grew as the series did.
Yeah.
The first book is like, hey, there's wizard school.
Yeah.
Harry is a special kid. He goes to wizard school.
He goes to wizard school.
That's the story.
We've got 2 locations. We've got Hogwarts and we've got Cabinet Under the Stairs, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. By the end, there's like a world war.
Yeah.
You know? And now they're the scope,
Yeah, it gets bigger.
It gets bigger. Yeah, it's a pretty relevant. There's a lot of locations, a lot of characters. There's a lot going on.
Yep.
But that just builds over time. There's a lot, and it's not, honestly, it's a lot bigger, but it's not that much different in the end.
Yeah.
It's still like, okay, you have Harry Potter, the wizard, he's a special boy, and his friends.
Yeah.
They're still there.
Yeah. I think what Harry Potter did so well is both with its characters and with its world building, it grew with its audience.
Yes.
Where like if I had read the books as they were coming out, I would have been a little bit older than Harry, but like if I still would have been in the target demographic.
Yes.
Like at the start, I have a very scope on my world where it's like I go to school, I go to home, maybe I go to my friend's house,
Yeah.
I go to church, and then like that's where I go.
Yeah.
And it's all in one town.
Yes.
Maybe I get to go on vacation and we go somewhere, but I'm not like I'm not going all over the place.
You're not globetrotting.
Yes. Right. And then like by the end, then like in his 18, I'm not exactly sure how old he is in the last book, but 18, 19, whatever.
Yeah.
Like you and I, we went on a road trip like with just our friends. Like there's no parents involved. We planned the whole thing. We're going out. We are experiencing the world like on our own terms.
Yes.
More or less. And then even for me, like the year after that, I flew halfway across the world to the Philippines by myself.
Yeah.
So I think it does a really, really good job of kind of the scope expands and grows
with the reader
and with how old Harry is. Like it all makes sense.
Yeah, as the character's own perception grows, your perception of the world grows because you are going through his point of view to a certain extent.
Which also coincides nicely then with now you have later books and your world can expand into the additional material, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And it makes the additional material makes more sense. The maturity of it makes more sense.
Yep.
And the Hunger Games kind of does a similar thing, at least for the first to the second. So in the initial Hunger Games, it's about Katniss needs to live through the Hunger Games. That's the story.
That's it.
Can she live? And then a love story. But that's it.
Yeah.
The second one does expand further because suddenly we're into a different we're in a different, what's it called? Katniss is in a different place now. And so the world's actually relevant. She's not just thinking about, well, what if I die?
Yeah.
There's actually more going on.
There's more. The stakes are raised.
Yeah. But also the stakes are raised, but also again, like you don't, at least initially in the second book, it's no longer just life or death.
Yeah.
So that you have some time to build other things without it feeling forced.
Yep.
Whereas it's like, okay, cool. They eat fancy food here. That's nice.
Yeah.
I thought the book was about they're going to go to an arena and fight to the death.
Yeah.
That's the part that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So there's some more room for things to grow around that. And then there's also a third part
Right.
to Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Which is where I think it's an interesting contrast. So Harry Potter is obviously longer, but Hunger Games does something that Harry Potter just kind of doesn't do. And it goes like, the scope goes like this.
Yeah.
Where suddenly there's a lot going on in the third book where there's like a lot of factions and characters. And suddenly there's propaganda is a relevant part of the story.
Yep.
And bombing, I don't know, and recovering from long-term injury as well.
Yeah.
Like a drug addiction randomly.
The scope shifts. It shifts very, very drastically and in a very, very short period of time.
Yes.
And it makes sense narratively because Katniss's world shifts very dramatically in a very short period of time. So I understand why it was done, but I do think from a reader's perspective, there's not having only one book that way didn't work because all of these new players that come in and are involved, I don't have time to care about any of them.
To be invested in any of that stuff. It's a very classic over budget in my perspective. It's true that she could have afforded 2+ books in this time period because there's just too much going on.
There's
too
so
fast.
much going on.
We have a whole war begin and be concluded within the book.
Right.
It's like, no, we could take our time.
We could flesh this out a little bit.
So that one, it's like Harry Potter, I think, is very close to perfect. At times, it's honestly a little bit under budget.
Sure.
There's stuff that's cool that doesn't get expanded.
That doesn't get it, yep.
And that kind of feels like it doesn't make sense and doesn't get expanded in the last book especially.
Yeah.
Just because, again, not to go too far, because Harry Potter, a lot of people know it or whatever, but I don't want to take everything that's in there. But in the last movie, it's like, wouldn't there be like other people in the world who care about what's going on?
Yeah.
And the question of why doesn't anyone use a gun is suddenly very relevant.
Very relevant
when we have a war going on. At that point, I feel like a gun would be pretty effective.
It's super convenient.
Especially if it's like, well, dab magic is evil. You shouldn't use it. It's like, okay, well,
okay, cool.
I might need a gun then. If he got a spell that says you die,
right?
And
I'm not going to use that spell because that spell is intrinsically evil.
Even that part.
We're fine with guns.
Even that part is like, but why is some magic
right? It doesn't
evil?
really get explained.
So that's where it's like later on it got a little bit under budget, but
yeah,
we haven't even talked about it. In general, I think it's probably better to be under budget than over.
I would agree. To an extent.
Interstellar's too far.
Yeah,
but like if people are waiting for more, in Lost, it was good up to a point.
Yeah,
Lost,
where it just didn't get fulfilled.
Like you did want the box to be opened.
Yeah,
but at a certain point, you don't care anymore.
Yeah,
you lose.
Yep.
I think being a little bit under budget, where there's little tidbits and stuff that the audience cares about in the world that aren't necessarily like this is critical to the plot.
Yeah, but
it is a part of the world that's interesting, and wouldn't it be fun to kind of see that expanded?
Yeah,
I think one, it's just a really, really good marketing idea because then you've got space for other books and or other supplementary material.
Yeah.
But I think it is, generally speaking, it is better leaving the audience wanting more than having the audience get to the point where they're like, all right, I've had enough. I'm good.
I didn't have any questions at the end of Hunger Games. I was just kind of I was kind of done. I was just kind of overstimulated.
It just kind of felt like and it wasn't that there were questions that I had, but it didn't feel like any of them were of consequence because I didn't care about what happened in the last book.
Exactly. I was just waiting for reading it. I was just kind of waiting for it to be over. I was like, okay, how much further do I gotta get before this is
and
done?
I remember at some point, it's probably right towards the middle of the book when they're moving through the city and somebody essentially says a line of like, it's like the arena, and it's like, okay, so we're really just trying to shoehorn that in.
Exactly.
Here now.
I was like, why are we going to an arena?
It's like, all right, whatever. But yeah, I mean, we did this comparison last episode or the episode before of comparing Red Rising to Hunger Games, because the first book of Red Rising is essentially the same as the first two books of the Hunger Games, but then Red Rising expands its scope drastically.
Yeah.
But one, it does so over 2 books, and each of those books are significantly longer than the Hunger Games books.
Yes.
So it pays off. It pays off, and it makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. And it also just has to do with the target of the story, because like in Red Rising, the romance plot is not given as much time, which is fine. Like it's fine in Hunger Games. It's just you then don't have time for other things. You have you're over budget. You need to cut one of these things.
Yeah. And I would also say in Red Rising, you are told in the first book there's bigger stuff going on than what's happening in this arena. In this arena, that's all we're focusing on this book.
Yeah.
But in the Hunger Games,
but even the main characters, it's like, by the way, this arena is only this. You need to get through this, but this is not your goal.
This is not your goal.
It's like, okay, good.
Whereas in Hunger Games, in the first 2 books, it's just like the goal is survive the Hunger Games. Cool, totally good with that. And then you get just kind of sidelined with the goal now completely shifted for the third book to a scope that I didn't know was going on.
Yeah. So Hunger Games went drastically over budget at the end.
Yeah.
Started out all right. In general, what are some things you guys can think of for staying on budget in scope?
I think in general, most stuff does.
Okay.
Yeah.
At least the stuff that does more in-depth world building. I mean, I can think of like sitcoms and stuff like that, where it's just like, all right, well, the world building was this thin, and that held you through 6 seasons. We're now on season 10, and the world building is still this thin. So I think that's a kind of a different topic altogether, and one that I'm not super duper familiar with, so I won't go into it. But I think in general, most things, and I guess to some extent it's because I try and curate what I'm watching and reading, because I only have so much time that it's this is good, so I'm going to watch it, and this is bad, so I'm not.
But it's still like, it's like, okay, well, just do it good.
Yeah.
Be right. I mean, in general, I think, Kevin, you were talking about like just, it's a lot of it is time management of like, where making it fit with the actual time you have to do things.
Yes, it's almost difficult to come in under budget in a piece of media, because the scope tends to expand to fill available space.
Yeah.
And so almost anything that is well executed will then just sort of get that as part of the process of being a good piece of media.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to be a good piece of media that then comes in under budget somehow, or somehow way over budget.
Yeah, that the over one is like a more of a concern, I feel like, that you need to actually look out for. Yeah, under is like you just didn't have time. But but in some ways that's almost like not beneficial, but if you get to a place where you didn't have time to world build as much as you wanted to, it's like, okay, well, you might have had some success there.
And you can always continue to expand it in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus
right.
Go on.
The more insidious part of the world building budget to me is on the authorial side of things, as opposed to the actual produced product.
Yeah. Like, so are you saying like things that never make it because of the world building scope?
Right, because the world building scope got out of control, and then the product that came out wasn't very good, and so nobody cared.
Yeah.
Or this scope got out of control and the product never got finished, so we never saw it, or we never saw it as it was intended to be seen.
Right.
Yeah, because it just got choked out by too much world to actually realize.
Yeah.
Yes.
A la the Song of Ice and Fire. Will it ever be finished? Who knows?
See, what's it called? The King Killer Chronicles.
That's another one. Will book 3 ever come out? Probably not.
Probably not. Whatever. That's just how it goes. But it is a prop, from everything you know, it is probably that, if it's way over budget in terms of like there's too much to fit in what you have to make.
Yeah.
So just don't do that.
Yeah.
Do it good. But in general,
I think we all kind of inherently get it. Like we just kind of like I think a good way of finding good examples or bad examples is watch movies, watch TV shows, read books, and you'll find stuff that you go, this is too much, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find stuff that you go, I really would have liked significantly more out of this.
Yeah.
And you'll get stuff that you're like, oh, this is
spot.
Yep.
right there. I got everything that I wanted out of this.
Yeah.
So, we could go out and list all of hundreds and hundreds of examples of different things that do it well or do it over or do it under.
Yeah.
But I think to some extent, everybody's personal budget is a little bit different as to what they are willing to sit through and what they're not.
Yeah.
And then from there, just kind of find what do you like, and then shoot for that as far as whatever you're writing, just kind of shoot to hit that sweet spot. And obviously, if you go out and you find these movies, find these books that fit the sweet spot that you like, there's an audience for it.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. I mean, that one very much goes to, and your point going to, that's very important to, if you're trying to create, to just consume what you want to create.
Yep.
That's it. So,
and if you want to keep your author side of the world building budget in check, the way to do that is to keep making things on like limited deadlines.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that you cannot afford to have the scope creep. Otherwise, this product will not get out the door.
Yep.
Yeah. Have people
that are holding you accountable just kind of on the day to day, but also like if you're writing novels, find a writer's group that you're like, okay, we meet once a month, we meet twice a month. I've got to have something to present at that time. I can't sit here twiddling my thumbs until my world is completely finished. I've just got to write.
It's like avoiding the author side going too far. We could basically boil it down to share your work. You need to share your work. And it's true in general, like for any of these things. Even it can get tempting with RPGs to like not actually finish things and have sessions or whatever.
Yeah.
Just you have to share your work to go anywhere with this stuff. So,
and that I mean, to be fair, it's also fun to just world build. And if you just want to spend your time just world building and it's never done, fine.
If you enjoyed the
totally
hobby of it, that's cool.
Yeah,
I think it's cool.
I had one of those like growing up that me and my brothers kind of like built this whole world. Has any of us done anything with it? No. Will it ever see the light of day? No.
But did you have fun?
But did we have fun? Absolutely.
Yeah, you have a blank check. Go spend it.
Right, exactly. you have all the budget in the world. If it's just for you, or if it's just for you and like one or two friends, then it's just kind of like, cool. Yeah, go
nuts.
It is never done, and that's the point.
But if you want to get it done, you've
got to set constraints.
Yep. Well, this was fun.
Absolutely.
I would want to keep talking, but we should go and let you guys go. We've got you in a chokehold. I'm sorry.
Yeah. There was no way you could have turned this video off.
Yeah. That's the rules. So this has been the Quarter Table Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed recording it. So yeah. See you guys later.
See ya.